Okay, hi guys. So we are continuing on with quadrilaterals today, but before we get started with what we're doing today, we're going to kind of review what we talked about yesterday really quickly. So we talked about how we are learning quadrilaterals this week. A quadrilateral is any geometric figure that has exactly 4 sides. So not 3 sides, not 5 sides, not 6 sides. All quadrilaterals have 4 sides. That prefix quad means 4. Okay, quadrilaterals can fall into 3 different categories. So the first category is parallelograms. So a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with 2 sets of opposite sides that are equal in length and are parallel. So these are all examples of parallelograms. The next one is a trapezoid. So a trapezoid is a quadrilateral with 1 set of parallel sides, just 1. So these are examples of trapezoids. And lastly, we have trapeziums. So that is a fun word to say. It means that they is a quadrilateral with no sets of parallel sides. So this is kind of what our hierarchy looks like. It's kind of like a little flow chart of how to break down a quadrilateral. So we see that we have quadrilateral. It can be either a parallelogram, a trapezoid, or a trapezium. Now we're going to look at parallelogram and how we can break it down into different types of parallelograms. So a parallelogram, like I said, has 2 sets of opposite sides. We're going to kind of skip through this because we already did it. But parallelograms can be broken down into either rectangles or rhombuses. So a parallelogram with opposite sides that are congruent or equal and have 4 right angles are known as rectangles. Now, the difference between rectangle and rhombus is a rhombus is a parallelogram with just 4 congruent sides. It does not have those 4 right angles. So that is going to be the difference between those 2. Okay, we'll skip this part. You guys know the difference. And then last but not least, we have a square. So a square is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. So we're going to talk about today we're talking about how these 4 different terms kind of relate to each other. Okay, so we did this yesterday, so we can get rid of it now. We did this yesterday. Okay, so now we're on day 2 of quadrilaterals. So we're going to kind of go through this and I'm going to talk about it. Oh, I guess not. Okay. Can I drag these? I don't know. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. So a quadrilateral is sometimes a parallelogram. It's also sometimes a trapezoid and sometimes a trapezium. Okay? So yeah, we're talking about like how we can figure out which is which. So a quadrilateral is sometimes a parallelogram. It's also sometimes a trapezium and sometimes a trapezoid. A parallelogram is sometimes a rhombus. Let's see where our green arrow takes us. So our green arrow takes us from a square. A square is always a rectangle. A rectangle is always a parallelogram. And a parallelogram is always a quadrilateral. So you can see that kind of green arrow going that way. So if you're at a square, you know that a square is a rectangle is a parallelogram is a quadrilateral. So you can kind of see that little flow chart over there. Now we're going to look at things that are never true. So a square is never a trapezium, and a trapezium is never a square. A rhombus is never a trapezoid, and a trapezoid is never a rhombus. Okay, so these 3, parallelogram, trapezoid, and trapezium, don't really cross boundaries at all. If you have a quadrilateral and you're trying to decide if it's parallelogram, trapezoid, or trapezium, when you pick which one of these 3 it is, that is where you are going to go. You are not going to ever cross and be like, it's a rhombus, okay, maybe it's also a trapezoid. That will never happen. It will never be a parallelogram and a trapezoid at the same time, because those are 2 very different things. But when you get over to parallelogram, that's when it gets kind of confusing, because a square is a rectangle is a parallelogram, but a parallelogram is not always a rhombus. Let's see if there's any more. There's definitely more. Okay. And a rhombus is sometimes a square. So it kind of gets confusing, but don't worry, we'll work with it. I want you to just remember the definitions that I've given you about which is which and what the rules are, and you're going to be able to figure out, okay, this is what the shape that I'm looking at has, this is what it is, and this is why, because it falls under these rules. Okay, so it says use the bag of straws, create one example of each, a square, a rectangle, a rhombus, and a parallelogram that can not be named as any of the previous terms. Well, we don't have any straws because we're doing distance learning, so this is kind of sad, but we're going to do it together. So it's asking us to create 4 shapes. So in order to do this, we can see that this is a rectangle because the opposite sides are congruent and there are 4 right angles. This is a trapezoid because opposite sides are congruent, but they do not have right angles. This is a square because they have 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. This is, I guess you would call it a diamond, but it's also a trapezium because it does not, oh, I guess it does have parallel sides. I'm sorry. This would be a trapezoid because its lines are parallel, so it means they're never going to intersect. But no, I'm sorry, that's not a trapezoid. That is a rhombus. Yeah, that's a rhombus, my bad. Because its opposite sides are parallel, but it does not have those 90-degree angles. Okay, so see, it gets a little confusing sometimes, but if you know the rules and you know the definitions for each of your shapes, it makes it really easy to catch yourself if you do make a simple mistake. Okay, so it says trapezoid and an uncommon quadrilateral. If it says uncommon quadrilateral, that means a trapezium. That's that little fun word to say. If you're watching this video, which you all should be, you can say trapezium. It'll make you sound really smart, and it's kind of a fun word to say. I say it all the time. So an uncommon quadrilateral is just a trapezium. So let's see what they made up. Okay, so we're able to see that with the green and blue straw up here, this is a trapezoid because the green and blue are opposite sides and they are parallel. They are never going to intersect. These red sides right here are eventually going to intersect if we continue to draw them out. They would intersect. So that is a trapezoid. This shape right here is a trapezium because it does not have any parallel sides. So that's that kind of funky, fun shape. Remember, it always has 4 sides because it's a quadrilateral, but it does not have any parallel sides. Okay? So we're going to go through. This is actually on your quiz, so I'm giving you a little preview. I'm not going to tell you the answers, but I want you to think about what possible shapes these could be. So I have exactly 4 sides. I have exactly 1 set of parallel sides. Who am I? So you're going to have to determine is that, go down, I want you to look at your chart. Your chart that looks like, this. I want you to look at this chart and say, okay, I know it's a quadrilateral because that's what we're dealing with because it has 4 sides. But if I'm looking at a quadrilateral, is it a parallelogram, trapezoid, or trapezium? And then you're going to go from there and try to figure out what type of shape it is based on knowing what each of these shapes means. So what's a trapezium? What's a trapezoid? What's a parallelogram? Figure out which one of those it is. Then go to rhombus, square, rectangle, figure out which one of those it is, if it's a parallelogram, and so on and so forth. So use this little chart to help you. You can always pause the video on this chart when you're doing your Google form worksheet if you need to use it for help. Okay, so we're going to go back. I'm going to look at those. So the next one says I have 4 sides that are all congruent, and I have at least 1 right angle. Okay, and then last one, I have 2 pairs of congruent sides. I have 2 obtuse angles and 2 acute angles. So obtuse is those big, let's see if I can draw. I think I can. Pen, let's see. So an obtuse angle is going to look like this. An acute angle is going to look like this. and then a right angle. Oops, that wasn't a very good one. Ignore that. A right angle is going to look like that. So it's a perfect point. This is smaller than 90 degrees, and this is bigger than 90 degrees. I don't know if you guys have learned angles yet, but that is what an angle looks like, okay? So we are going to stop for there. So that is it for today. Please make sure to rewatch this video if you would like. Make sure you know your definitions for the different shapes. It will make it a heck of a lot easier for you to remember them and figure out this who am I activity if you know your definitions for your shapes. Okay, so if you have any questions, please email me. I am available to Zoom call with you if you need me to explain something. Make sure that you're making it worth your while and my while. So if you just have one little question that I can answer over message, do that. But if you need me to really explain something to you, let me know and we can figure something out. Okay, so bye guys, good luck.